Yeah. Okay. All right. Wonderful. So welcome back to Wednesday night's great debates. We haven't, gotten back to this mini series. At least it used to be a mini series. Now it's more than a mini series of the great debates of coronavirus, the great D's, the Torah, the living Torah, the breathing Torah of that's being presented by the virus with all these unique questions. And this is a question that our community actually posed to Rabbi Schechter. And for those that were there Shabbos afternoon, you heard the short version of this. Tonight we're going to expand on it. But if you weren't there, don't worry. You're going to get the full context here this evening. And I followed up with a couple of the questions that were brought up during the Shabbos afternoon class back to Rabbi Schechter just to confirm his psak. But we're going to get straight to it. The question is, and here's the question pertaining to Chanukah that we are dealing with this season that we have not dealt with in the past, and that is the custom is that we light the Hanukkah candles, of course, in our home. We know that there was an establishment that was made by the rabbis after the miracle of Hanukkah, that Ledoros, for generations, we have to, in perpetuity, recognize the great miracle that is the miracle of Hanukkah on starting Chaf Hey Kislev tomorrow night for 8 days, to thank God for the great miracle of the fact that we won the war. We were able to hold on to the Beis Hamikdash for another 200 years. And the miracle was highlighted over the fact that God made the oil in the Beis Hamikdash last for 8 days, even though it only had enough oil to last for 1 day. And from there, we start lighting Hanukkah candles in our home. But in addition to that, we light Hanukkah candles at shul. And the reason for that we'll get to a little later. But we light Hanukkah candles at shul. This year, we are not davening at shul, especially in California. But there are Jews all over the world that are not davening in shul this time of year due to the virus, due to the pandemic. And in California, we know that we are forced to daven outside to help slow the spread, and the government has enforced that places of worship should convene outdoors. So if that's the case, do we light our menorah, our shul menorah, outdoors? This is the question that a few people asked me a number of weeks ago. I had a number of conversations with Rabbi Schechter about this. In fact, last Wednesday evening, or was it Thursday evening? Last Thursday evening, almost a week ago, I called Rabbi Schechter to discuss this question with him. And it was maybe 12 hours later, I received in my inbox a written responsa from Rabbi Schechter dealing with the question that we posed to him. So this is, I'm sure that there were a lot of communities that posed to him, but I know that our community discussed this at great length with Rabbi Schechter, and you're going to see the psak that he gave for the question. Again, the question is, do we light our menorah at shul? So the question really has to get to, we have to give us, the full context in order to appreciate the answer is, well, why is it that we light Chanukah in shul? So every single rabbinic, and this is where we have to begin, every single rabbinic institution is patterned after, or modeled after is probably a better word to use, modeled after a biblical institution. Every rabbinic commandment. For example, there's a rabbinic enactment, or a gzera, a decree, a rabbinic law that if someone is, let's say, having a meal or just a cup of coffee, okay? And let's say I made a shahakol before I started drinking this cup of coffee, and now I want to take the cup of coffee to go. So I want to take it from my house, and I want to continue drinking it when I get to shul. When I get to shul, the rabbis say I have to make a new bracha. Yeah, I've already made a bracha. No, this is called shinoi makom. Once the rabbis established that the rabbis established that if you change your place, you need to make a new blessing. The new place comes with a new blessing. Where does this come from? They didn't just make this up. It comes from, they patterned this halacha after a biblical institution. What's the biblical institution? That is shinui makom, changing your place that exists by the Karban Pesach. Okay, this is just one example, but there are many, 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 many examples. This comes from the Gemara Psachim. The Gemara Psachim says, "Kol de tikkun rabbanan." Whenever the rabbis enacted something, it was ke'ein d'oraisa tikkun. It was similar to, it was modeled after, patterned after a biblical enactment, a biblical law. Chanukah is no different. Chanukah is a rabbinic institution. It's not a biblical institution. It is a rabbinic institution. And therefore, if it's a rabbinic institution, like any other rabbinic institution, it is modeled after a biblical law. So what is the biblical law that Chanukah is modeled after? When we light our Chanukiah, what is that representing that already exists in the biblical realm? So comes along the Ramban and says the lighting of the menorah inside the Beis Hamikdash, which I think we understand intuitively because that is what we're doing in order to represent the great miracle that God did with the menorah. But we're going to see now the details of the laws of lighting the Chanukiah that we do today are details of laws that exist in the lighting of the menorah inside the Beis Hamikdash. Take a look at what the Ramban says. So the laws of lighting the menorah inside the temple are brought down in the Torah right after the laws pertaining to the bringing of the offerings of the Nesiim, of the tribal leaders, when the Mishkan was erected. There was a whole ceremony of tribal leaders bringing karbanos, bringing offerings. And right after that set of halachos that exists at the end of Parshas Shlach, we then get, the end of Parshas Naso, we get into Parshas Bahaloska. Comes along the Torah and it says, Daber el Aaron, that God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, speak to Aaron, V'amarta elav, and tell him, Bahaloska el haneros el mul pnei ha-menorah, that when you set up the lamps, Yerusheva Neros, you're supposed to have 7 lamps, and it gets into the laws of what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to have, it's supposed to be Shem and Zayas. Okay, fine. Says Rashi asks, he says, Lama nismacha parshas menorah leparshas nesiim. Why does the whole episode of the menorah come right after the whole episode of the tribal leaders bringing their offerings? Says Rashi, Lefi, because Shekishira Aaron Chanukah Sanasiim, because when Aaron saw all of this beautiful inaugural ceremony of the Nesiim, of the tribal leaders for erecting the Mishkan, Chalsha Az Da'ato, he became depressed, he became despondent. Why? Because he was not able to be involved in the in this inaugural ceremony. Why? Because he and his family were the ones that were the functionaries. They were the ones that were facilitating the ceremony. They themselves did not bring their own offering because they were helping everyone else by shechting it, by carrying the blood, by doing the offering for everyone. But they themselves couldn't bring their own. They were working that day. So therefore he became upset. So comes along Rashi, he says, that's why the menorah is listed right after the whole episode with the Nesiim. Shelo haya imayim b'Chanukah lo hu v'lo shifto amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God says to Aaron, chayecha, by your life, shelcha gedolim shelahem, your merit is even greater than theirs. Sha'ata madlik u'meitiv esaneros, because you get to light and clean out the candles. And that was an appeasement for Aaron HaKohen, that he has this special mitzvah of menorah. Asks the Ramban, he says, come on. This is the thing that appeased Aaron HaKohen. First of all, says the Ramban, there are already so many unique halachos pertaining to Kohanim by the Beis Hamikdash. When it comes to the temple, that's Kohanim territory. That is the entire family of Aaron HaKohen. I am a Yisrael. I am not a Kohen. I have a lot of mitzvot that I get to fulfill. But there are also a lot of mitzvot that I cannot fulfill. There's a lot. That's it. Why? Because I'm not a Kohen. No matter how much I want to be a Kohen, I'm not going to be a Kohen. Y'all know the classic joke. A fellow comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, make me into a Kohen. Rabbi says, sorry, it doesn't work like that. Come on, Rabbi, I really want to be a Kohen. Just make me a Kohen. Rabbi, sorry, sir, it doesn't work like that. Rabbi, I will give a donation of $1 million to the shul if you make me a Kohen. Well, you know what? If you put it like that, sure, I'll make you a Kohen. Tell me, sir, why do you want to be a Kohen so badly? Oh, well, my father was a Kohen. My grandfather was a Kohen. My great-grandfather was a Kohen. If I try to be a Kohen, it doesn't matter what kind of donation I'm going to give to the shul. I'm never going to be a Kohen. Why was Aaron despondent, particularly here? Number one, asked the Ramban. Number two, why is this a good appeasement? There were so many other mitzvot that God already gave Aaron that are only for his tribe. Why menorahs should be any different? Says the Ramban, God was not just referring to the lighting of the menorah inside the temple. Says the Ramban the following. He says, Aval, take a look on the right side of the screen, or it could be mirrored for you. It could be all the way to the left. But take a look where my arrow is. It says, Aval inyan ha'agada hazu lidrosh remez min ha'parsha. Rather, there's a hint in the parsha here, al Chanukah shel nerosh ha'haisa b'bayis sheni. Rather, what was God referring to? He was referring to the lights that were going to be lit during the second temple period, al yidei Aaron ubanav, by Aaron's offspring, by his later generations. Who's that? Ritzoni Lomar, Hashmonai Kohen Gadol Ubanav. This is referring to the family of the Hashmonaim, the Kohanim, the Gedolim, right? The Kohen Gadol and his family that existed at the time of the second temple period during the Chanukah story. And this is what God was using to appease Aaron, that you are also going to lead a mitzvah that envelops all of Klal Yisrael, just like the offerings of the Nesiim. Yours is greater than theirs. Why? Because by you, there's going to be no tribes left out. Everyone is going to be involved in the mitzvah of the menorah. How? Through the lighting of the Chanukah. What? The lighting of the Chanukah, that doesn't happen inside the temple, says the Ramban. But the establishment of lighting a Chanukah on Chanukah is directly modeled after. It is like a continuation. It's a rebirth of the mitzvah of the lighting of the menorah inside the temple. That's what we do when we light the Chanukah inside our own homes. Let's give another example. There's so many great examples of this. Take a look over here. Another example. There is a discussion found in the Talmud pertaining to how is one supposed to perform the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles. Because there's potentially two ways you could do it. Either you could light the candles and then place it in the place they're supposed to be in. Now, where are you supposed to place your menorah? So this is a discussion that's found in the Talmud as well, where the Gemara says it depends on what's going on in the world around you. If you're living during a safe time, where it's easy to express your religious beliefs without, God forbid, the threat of prejudice, then you should place your menorah outside of your home on the opposite side of your mezuzah, in order so that it could be in a public place, in the most public place possible, to get the most publicity over there for the miracle that God made. However, if you're living during a time of danger, so then manicha al shulchano udio, it's enough to just put it on your table. That's good enough. So there's two ways you could potentially do this mitzvah. Either you could light it and then place it in the place it's supposed to be in, either by your front door or on your table, wherever you're going to end up leaving the menorah once it's lit. Or it's that it needs to be in place and then you light it. Is it that hanacha osa mitzvah, placing a lit menorah, is the mitzvah, or hadlaka osa mitzvah, or is it lighting the menorah that's the mitzvah? Says Rashi, of course, we paskin, the way that we practice is that we light the menorah already in place. We don't move it after it's lit. Once it's in place, then we light it. That's how we assume that hadlaka osa mitzvah. Says Rashi, why? Why is it that hadlaka osa mitzvah, that lighting is the way to fulfill the mitzvah, not placing? Says Rashi, because the mitzvah of Chanukah is dependent on the lighting. Madlikin kideshkachan. Where do we find this? Bimenorah, by the menorah. What's Rashi referring to? It's referring to the menorah inside the Beis Hamikdash. this halacha of lighting the Chanukah in our homes over Hanukkah, we light it in place, just like the menorah in the temple was lit in its place. It was in its place, and when it was lit. This is another example of how the mitzvah of lighting the menorah inside of our homes today is directly patterned after lighting the menorah inside of the temple. Two more examples that come directly from Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Yosef Karo, 1488 to 1575, writes the following in his index, his code to Jewish law. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Kol hashmanim v'hapsilos kesherim l'ner Chanukah. When lighting Hanukkah candles, you can use any sort of oils, any sort of wicks, wax candles, oil, anything that, any fuel that's gonna, that any sort of oils. You can use sesame oil, peanut oil, any types of oils, any types of wicks can be used, cotton wicks, and any types of wicks can be used. Kesherim l'ner Chanukah. Va'afapi. Okay, he says that you have to make sure that it gives off a nice light. Okay. Says the Rama, Umihu. However, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, according to some historians, only lived 32 years. It's a question of when exactly he was born. He passed away, we know, in 1572, and he was either born in 1520, 1530, or 1540. He lived even if you take the most extreme position that he lived, he was born in 1520. I mean, such a short life, but accomplished so much. Says the Rama in Krakow, he says, Umihu, however, Shemen Zayis, mitzvah min hamuvchar, using olive oil is the best kind. Best to use olive oil as opposed to sesame oil or peanut oil, best, or wax candles. Best thing to do is to use olive oil. Why? Comes along the Mishnah Berurah, quoting from the Kolbo. The Mishnah Berurah says, Mikol Mako mitzvah b'shel shemen tfei. The best type of oil to use is shemen, much better than shel shava, much better than using wax candles. Da'al yedei hashemen na'aseh hanes, because it was through olive oil that the miracle occurred, not through wax, not through any other oil, through olive oil. And therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, based off of the Kolbo, you're supposed to use olive oil. That's the best way to fulfill the mitzvah. Interestingly, from a historical note, look, the Ramah continues and he points out a historical note. He says, let's say it's difficult to be able to attain olive oil. Let's say you're living in such a place, or it's such a time that there's a shortage of olive oil, right? You imagine if right now the mitzvah was that you need to make sure that your wicks of your Chanukah are made from paper towels. It's right now so you can't get you go to Costco, you have to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning in order to get a package of paper towels. So imagine if there was an olive oil shortage. So says the Rama, mitzvah bishmanim shadam she'orem zach v'naki. Use any sort of fuel as long as it's going to give over a clear flame. V'nohagim b'medinos elu, and he says that in our community in Krakow, he says that we light our Chanukah b'ner shel shava. We use wax candles. Ki oro tzalul k'mo shemen, because it gives off a beautiful light, just like oil. Presumably, he wasn't able to get his hands on olive oil, the Rama, which is why he used the wax candles. But anyway, what do you see from here? Yet another example. This is already our third example of how the lighting of the Chanukah is directly patterned after the lighting of the menorah inside the temple. Let's give another example. Continues the Shulchan Aruch further, and he says that one is not allowed to receive any benefit from the lights of the menorah. Writes the Shulchan Aruch, he says, "Va'afilu b'leil Shabbos shebetoch yemei Chanukah mutar lahadlik b'ner Chanukah hashmana v'hapsilo she'asur lahadlik b'em ner Shabbos." That there are certain laws and regulations regarding what type of oil and wicks one is allowed to use for lighting Shabbos candles. And the reason for that is because you want to make sure that on Shabbos it gives over a very good light, because on Shabbos you need to be able to get benefit from the flame. On Chanukah, you're not allowed to get benefit from the flame. And therefore, it matters much less about the types of wicks and oils you use, because you're not allowed to get benefit from the flame at all. Lefi, says the Shulchan Aruch, she'asur le'ishtamish b'ner Chanukah. You're not allowed to get any sort of benefit from the lights of the candles. Now, what is the benefit that one you can receive? That's called hanashal mitzvah, the benefit of fulfilling a mitzvah. Of course, when you light Hanukkah candles, it's a very joyous time. You get benefit over the fact that you're fulfilling a mitzvah. When we say benefit over here in the Shulchan Aruch, when Rabbi Yosef Karo says you're not allowed to receive any pleasure from the candles, it doesn't mean pleasure over the fact you're fulfilling mitzvah. It means, let's say you need the light of a candle in order to count your money or to read a book. So you can't use your Chanukiah in order to do that. Your Shabbos candles, though, you can. That's the difference. That Shabbos candles, you can get warmth from it. You need to warm up your hands a little bit after davening outside in the cold. So you come in and you warm your hands by the Shabbos candles. That's okay. Not by the Chanukiah, though. You can't do it by the Chanukiah. This is the halacha that's quoted inside Shulchan Aruch. This is found in the Talmud, quoted by the Rif. Ask the Ran and the Baal Ma'or. The Ran was a much later Rishon. The Baal Ma'or was a much earlier Rishon. But both of them are commentaries on the Rif, but they are opposite commentaries. The Baal Ma'or, written by Rabbeinu Zrachia Halevi, was an attack on Rabbeinu Alfasi. Rabbeinu Alfasi, I think he passed away in like 1038 or something like that. Marty, why don't you check that up for me? That he passed away, I think, in the middle of the 11th century. The Rif, what he did is that he condensed the entire Talmud into concise, bottom line, this is the way to practice as a Jew, okay? But he kept the order of the Talmud. So he did not change the format of the Talmud. He just condensed it into, custom, Jewish law. This is bottom line. Don't be distracted by the other opinions. This is what you have to do. So he's coming and he's taking positions throughout his entire work. Rabbeinu Zrachia Halevi argued vehemently on so many of the different positions of the Rif. The Ran is one of the defenders of the Rif, okay? But they both deal with the same question, which is, why is it that you're not allowed to get benefit from the lights of the Chanukiah? Why is it you can't get warmth or you can't use it for reading light? Why? Because there is a halacha found in Chumash, found in the Torah, that you're not allowed to receive any benefit. Again, what we're talking about is physical benefit from what's called hektish, anything that's sacrosanct, anything that is used in the temple. So for example, let's say I look out onto my field in the morning, I'm having my morning coffee. I look out onto my field and I see my sheep grazing about, and I say, that beautiful plump sheep, he's really grown up to be a perfect Karban Pesach. You know what? I am now declaring that sheep, this is my sheep that I'm going to use for my Paschal lamb this year. At that moment, that sheep can no longer work for me. I can't get any benefit from its wool. It is hektish, completely hektish. It belongs to the temple. Amira legavoa. As soon as I make the declaration to God, it's as if I actually already handed the sheep over to the Kohen. This applies to anything inside the temple. And if one receives benefit from anything in the temple, it's called a me'ilah, which is, me'ilah is trespassing into God's territory. Okay, it's stealing from God. Receiving benefit from the lights of the menorah is no different. Physical benefit from the lights of the menorah. If I use the menorah inside the temple to warm myself, that is a violation of stealing from God. It's me'ilah. So therefore, say the Ran and say the Baal Ma'or, you can't receive any benefit from the lights of the Chanukiah that we light in our homes thousands of years after the destruction of the temple. Why? Because the lighting of the Chanukiah is a direct pattern. It's modeled after the lighting of the menorah inside of the temple. And that's exactly what the Mishnah Berurah quotes right over here. He says, The reason is because this is our way that we are recognizing the miracle that happened with the menorah. Taknua asua menorah she'ein mishtamshin baklal. Therefore, we treat it like a menorah, like a real menorah, a 7-branch menorah that exists inside the temple, that we don't receive any benefit from it at all. Now we get to the punchline example. This is example number 5 that we're getting to. We have a custom of lighting menorahs in our shuls. Over Chanukah, every night of Chanukah, between Mincha and Mariv, we light with a blessing inside of our shuls. This is quoted inside of the work called the Torah. The Torah, now his mother did not call him Torah. What did his mother call him? His mother called him Yaakov. Yaakov ben Asher. Yaakov ben Rabbeinu Asher, he was one of the sons of the Rush. In fact, he quotes his father. He says, Adoni Avi, that's what Aleph over here means. Adoni Avi Harush. My father, my master, the Rush, Rabbeinu Asher. Rabbeinu Asher was first a Rav for the first third to 3/4 of his life in the Ashkenaz community in Germany, and then ended up moving in 1301 to Spain, to Toledo, and he was there from 1301 to 1327. And he went with his son Yaakov, and Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Harash wrote this amazing work called the Torah, the 4 sections of Torah law that are practical today. Comes along the Torah, and he writes the following. He says that Kasav, let me find this 1 minute. He quotes over here from the Trumas Hadeshen the custom of lighting a menorah inside of shul. Here we go. He says, Ubebeis HaKnesses, inside of shul, we light the menorah, manicha ledarom, and we place it on the southern wall. Why? Zecher lemenorah, because it's a remembrance to the menorah that was lit inside the temple. Shahaisa bedarom, that was on the southernmost wall in the temple. Now, the menorah was on the southernmost wall in the temple, so where do we place our Chanukah at shul? On the southernmost wall of the temple. And this is exactly what the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, in his major work, the Beis Yosef, which was the encyclopedia that was attached to the Torah. It's an encyclopedia telling you everything you need to know in full detail on practical Jewish law. It is an unbelievable work. If you take a look, where is it? It is this top shelf right over here. That is the Beis Yosef. That's the Torah with the commentary of the Beis Yosef. You just imagine accomplishing. He did not have a team of authors. He did not have a team of researchers. This was him by himself sitting with a pen. It's just mind-blowing when you stop and think about that. Just the sheer a mass of Torah that he needed to know in order to compile this encyclopedia. So what is the source of the Torah? He says, when the Torah says that you put the menorah in the southernmost wall of the shul, it's zecher lemenorah. It is a remembrance for the menorah in the temple. But Trumas Hadeshen, he gets this from the Trumas Hadeshen. That there are different customs about when we say the southernmost wall. Is it the southernmost wall facing north, or is it the southernmost wall facing east? So that's a discussion, but everyone agrees that it's supposed to be on the southernmost wall. Now hold on 1 second. And this is what I called Rabbi Schechter about. I called Rabbi Schechter and I said, we're davening outside. We're not davening inside the shul. So this custom of lighting the menorah inside of our shuls, which is clearly patterned after the lighting of the menorah inside of the temple, being and that's why we put it on the southernmost wall. So if we're not davening inside of our miniature temples, if we're not davening inside of our shuls, So should we light our menorah at shul? Now, I don't want to confuse anyone. If there's one thing that you leave with after tonight's class, one thing is the most important thing, is in your own homes over Chanukah, you light the menorah with a blessing every single night. Don't get confused. We are talking about at shul, because there were a couple of people that after the class on Shabbos, I must not have made that clear, and they were saying, "Wait, Rabbi, this year we're not lighting menorah this year." No. You are lighting the menorah at home in the way you always do it. Don't change it one iota. The question is at shul, how do we light menorah? At shul, do we still make the blessing if we're not inside the shul, which is the whole reason why we're lighting the menorah in the first place, is because it's supposed to be a remembrance of the fact that we lit it in the temple and now we light it in our miniature temple on the southernmost wall, etc. So what is one supposed to do? So we just saw the Trumas Hadeshan. According to the Trumas Hadeshan, who says that it's patterned after the temple, it's not even a question. Of course, it would be then that you shouldn't make a blessing inside shul this year if you are praying outdoors and lighting the menorah outdoors. Rabbi Shechter said that you should still, sing Haneres Halalu, sing Ma'ot Tzur, but you just don't make the blessing because there's no blessing to make. You're not fulfilling the custom in the way that it was originally enacted. There is another opinion though, and so I want to show you this. This is Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef. Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef is the current Sephardic chief rabbi, and he quotes the following from the Rivash. It is in Hebrew, so I will translate as we go. It's only a 1.5-minute clip, but it's nice to see, one of the Gedolei Yisrael that we don't really hear as much about, being in an Ashkenaz community in America, all the way out in California, in Southern California, in San Diego, in La Jolla. We very rarely interact with, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the son of Rav Ovadia Yosef, the author of the Yalkut Yosef, one of the Gedolei Ador in the Sephardic community in Israel, the chief rabbi of Israel. So it's still nice to hear him give his psak halacha and give his opinion, but I'll, of course, translate. So let me play it.
This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Can you hear it?
היבש, הוא היה 200 שנה, קצת יותר, אחרי הפוסקים, המנהיג והיום שהזכרתי. הוא כותב, התמעט העניין של פרסומי ניסה. פעם היו מדליקים בחוץ, היום מדליקים בתוך הבית, אז אין פרסומי ניסה. מה עושים? מדליקים בבית כנסת. לא רק בית כנסת, כל מקום שמתאספים ויושבים שם, מסיבת חנוכה למשל.
So he's quoting from the Rivash. The Rivash is another one of the poskim. He says lived about 200 years after the Rambam. That the Rivash, he is of the opinion that in reality, the whole reason why we light the Chanukah at shul is not because we're patterning after the temple. Rather, it's because it's an opportunity of parsumei nisa, of publicizing the miracle. Therefore, he says, it doesn't really matter where the public, where that sort of advertisement of God's miracle is going to be taking place. It could take place in a large courtyard, in a mall, for example. According to the Rivash, that's why, there's the Lubavitch Hasidim, what they do is they will have these huge candle lighting and menorah lighting ceremonies in, Times Square and, on the George Washington Bridge and all these very, very public places, because it's presumably they're following after this opinion of the Rivash that you want to be able to publicize the miracle as much as possible. And that's why we light inside of our shuls.
This Torah class is
like at a Hanukkah party, he says. It's unbelievable. He says, and let's say at a wedding, he says, which is very uncommon in the Ashkenaz community to follow this opinion, but let's say at a wedding where there's a lot of people there. So says Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, you should have a menorah there over Hanukkah. A close friend of mine, one of my roommates in yeshiva, got married on Hanukkah. So according to Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, there should be a menorah there, a Chanukah there, and you should light with a bracha, he says. It's not in anyone's home. It's not at shul. You're at a wedding hall. You should light with a bracha because look at how many people there are that can experience the miracle of Chanukah. As long as there's 10 people, he says. As long as there's 10 people.
מתפללים בחוץ, בחצר, יש אנשים שמפחדים מהמגפה הזו, לצערנו הרב.
Says there's a lot of people that are very nervous about corona, so they're davening outside.
ראינו אנשים שנדבקו, אנשים בריאים ונפטרו.
It says because unfortunately there's a lot of people on Hashim Briim that are healthy people that contracted the virus, and unfortunately they died, and so people are nervous about it. So people are davening outdoors. So what are you supposed to do about lighting Hanukkah candles?
צריך להיזהר, צריך לשמור, זה לא לשמור מרחק, לא צריך לשמור. יש הרבה אנשים שעדיין מתפללים בחצר, בחצרות בית הכנסת או בחנייה.
Still people davening in parking lots in the courtyards of shul.
דווקא בית כנסת. זה בא להשלים את הפרסום הניסה מה שהיה חסר, כמו שהסביר הריבש.
So he says, so of course you should light the Chanukah at your outdoor minyan with a blessing, because the whole purpose is to publicize the miracle. So this is a machlokas that we're finding now between the Trumas Hadeshen and the Rivash. This is two opinions. Is it that you're supposed to light in the shul setting because of the fact that it's patterned after the temple? Or is it that it's a form of publicizing the miracle? If it's a form of publicizing the miracle, then even outdoors, you shall light with a blessing. However, if you follow the Trumas Hadeshen, the Ashkenaz opinion, so then it would, if you're outside the shul, it wouldn't make sense outside of your home to light with a blessing. Only shul or home, you light with a blessing. And that's exactly how Rabbi Shechter paskins. He says, I called him Yud Zayin Kislev in the morning. He wrote this, right after we spoke. Says Rabbi Shechter, Achein Nir LaHosef, Shebakam Bekomos, says Rabbi Shechter, Adayin Mispalim Mechutz LaBeis HaKnesses. We're still praying outside of shul in many places, like in California. Lefamim Bachutz Mamish, like really outside. And sometimes it says Lefanim Bechadarim Acherim. Sometimes it's in order to spread out the minyan. You're going to different like classrooms inside the shul. Bebinim Beis HaKnesses. Ubebeis Yosef Hevi Sheyesh Dea Berishonim. The Beis Yosef quotes the opinion found in the Rishonim from the Trumas Hadeshen that we just saw. Da'aminit lahaluk Beis HaKnesses bebrachos, that the whole reason why we light in shul with a blessing is because miyusar al kach shebeis HaKnesses dino kemikdash ma'ad. It's because it's like a miniature Beis HaMikdash who's zecher lemikdash, and it is a remembrance to the Beis HaMikdash. Uladeos elo hayanira, and therefore, according to these opinions, it would seem, says Rabbi Shechter, the kol shelo tiskayim ha'adlaka mibifnim, anyone that is not going to be davening inside, but makom hamekudash b'kedushas Beis HaKnesses, in the shul, in the sanctuary, the way it's normally done, she'emin hanachol levarach alav, you should not make a blessing, the safi brachos lahakel, because we take making blessings very seriously. You are, using God's name, and therefore you have to take it very seriously. Even though we have the set minyan outdoors, it doesn't matter. It's only if it's inside of a shul, says Rabbi Shechter. So people were asking me, we have a very unique setup where from our outdoor minyan, you're able to see inside of shul, right? So why don't we light inside shul in the normal way with a bracha? No one will be in there. I'll go inside, I'll light, I'll make the brachos, and outdoors we'll sing Haniras Halalu, we'll sing Ma'usur. So I called Rabbi Shechter again today to see what he felt. And he felt, and as I assumed, he said no, because you can't have it both ways. If you're not davening inside of shul, if you're not davening in shul, so then you can't have one guy go in and light the menorah and say, oh, everyone is inside shul now. No, everyone's outside. No one's inside, right? So he felt that you shouldn't make a blessing even like that. So this year, it's going to be a little bit, it's been a unique year thus far. It'll be another unique aspect of this year. Hopefully this is the only year we have to do this, that we're going to be lighting our menorah outside of shul in our outdoor minyan and without a bracha. But you see, the Torah comes alive. Chanukah, as the Shulchan Aruch says, there is no obligation to have a su'udah on Chanukah. There's no obligation to have a meal, because the miracle, says the Levush, was rather the attack against us was an attack to our spiritual, the spiritual side of us. the Greeks wanted us to adopt Greek culture. They did not want to, like Haman, get rid of the Jewish people. They did not want to lahachriz zaram. He didn't want to destroy us. Antiochus, what did he want to do? He wanted us to adopt the Greek culture. He wanted us to stop learning Torah and stop performing mitzvot. And on Chanukah, what are we supposed to do? Instead of having a big lavish Purim type of meal, we have our nice meals. But, says the Ramah, we should sing songs of praise to God, and we should double our efforts in learning Torah. And we see, even this year, even in this unique year, there's new Torah that is coming out this year that never existed before. All thanks to this very unique situation that we're living in. So, Emir Hashem, this Chanukah will be the only Chanukah we have to do this. And hopefully even next year, we'll be able to do the real thing by lighting the menorah inside of the third Beis HaMikdash. All right, we'll stop here. I have a couple minutes to hang around before I have to go if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. When we